Get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the first Executive Women's Council event for the new year. We have a couple of fantastic speakers lined up for you to listen to today. My name is Anna Stinson. I'm the Director of Programming for the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. I want to go over just a quick couple of housekeeping notes this morning. Your audio and video are muted as you come onto the webinar. If you need to communicate with the host, please use the chat feature below. Also, feel free to submit your questions as we go along with the conversation in the Q&A section, and our speakers will try to get to them. We will also be recording this session, and we will send a link out once it is available. I do want to take a minute to start to thank our sponsors before we get started. Our events would not be possible without them. We have a brand new sponsor this year. Our presenting sponsor is Abbott. Thank you so much for joining us this year. Our premier sponsors are CenterPoint Energy, Mortenson, SDK CPAs, Sunrise Banks, and Excel Energy. And our event sponsors are Allied Parking and Lohman Abdo. Thank you so much. We could not do these events without you. All right, so let's get right to the meat of our program and our speakers. I'll do a quick introduction for both of them, and then we will get right into it. Nancy Lyons. CEO, author, and speaker Nancy Lyons has been at the forefront of the work culture conversation for more than 20 years. People first as a business strategy is the guiding principle that fuels the unique, award-winning culture at Clockwork. Nancy has led employees and clients through thousands of business, team, and work culture challenges. As a digital veteran, she has witnessed the dramatic change technology brought to both businesses and people, and yet also sees people and companies struggling to figure out how to adapt. Her first book was Interactive Project Management: Pixels, People, and Process, a human-centered approach to producing digital products. Her current book, Work Like a Boss, a kick-in-the-pants guide to finding and using your power at work, is the little book everyone needs to remember the actions, attitudes, and attributes that will make work better for individuals and everyone around them. Pahua Yang Hoffman serves as Senior Vice President of Community Impact for the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. In her role, she serves as Chief Strategist for Grant Making and Community Impact. In addition to managing relationships with the organization's two client foundations, the F.R. Bigelow Foundation and Mardag Foundation, she also assists the foundation in areas of public policy and community engagement and advises the CEO on statewide strategic leadership. Prior to this role, Pahua was the 7th Executive Director of the nonpartisan nonprofit, the Citizens League, and was the first woman and the first person of color to hold the position since the organization's founding in 1952. Her current board service includes Catholic Charities with St. Paul and Minneapolis, where she serves as chair of the Advocacy Committee and a member of the Executive Committee, the Minneapolis Parks Foundation, the Constellation Fund, Girl Friday Theater Productions, and as an advisory board member with the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of St. Thomas. I don't know how either one of you have time to do your regular jobs with all the other things that you do. Pahua, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you have this great conversation with Nancy. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Anna, for the opportunity. Thank you to the Chamber and to all of our sponsors for making this event possible. I'm super excited this morning. Welcome, everybody, to get a chance to interview someone who I admire. And Nancy, I don't know when you entered my life, but all of a sudden you were just like omnipresent. You were everywhere. And so I'm totally fangirling right now. I'm gonna try to stay professional and really excited to be here with you.
Thank you. Thanks to the Chamber and thanks, Anna, for that intro. And Pahua, when they brought your name up, I had the exact same response. I was like, oh yeah, her. And then I'm super thrilled that yesterday we decided we're friends. We're gonna be friends.
We're gonna be friends.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that's the best thing that's come out of this Chamber thing. I mean, this whole thing is swell too, but I'm excited that we're going to Mexico.
Yes, that's in the plan. It's already in the works. So
Right.
Stay tuned, everybody. There'll be lots to follow on Twitter and whatnot once we get going on our trip. So I'm going to get right in, Nancy. I'm going to start us off. I want my goal for today is for people to know more about your book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I want everyone to walk away from this session getting to know a little bit about you. So I'm going to ask the questions that I want to know about you, hoping that others will appreciate the question. So Nancy, what I love about you is that you live your life out loud. In your book, which we'll get to, but in social media, in places that I've seen you, you just kind of let you be you. And despite this, what do people assume about you, and what do they get wrong?
I think they assume that I am, first of all, an extrovert. Second of all, confident all of the time. People say that to me a lot, like, how can you be so confident? And and of course, my lack of confidence makes me hear that as, you're pathetic. How are you so confident all the time? So I think those are the two big assumptions, that I'm always on.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I used to have people say to me, I have a sense of humor that I'm super grateful for. And when I was growing up, people would say something funny. They'd introduce me and they'd be like, she's funny, say something funny. And that's a surefire way to just shut me down. Yeah. And in fact, when I first started writing the book, I tried to make the book funny, but trying to be funny is never actually funny. So I had to rewrite an entire draft because it was so sad, and not funny at all. So I think, this idea that someone is always funny, always confident, always on, and an extrovert, those are the biggest assumptions people have made about me.
What do they get right about you?
Well, I hope they get that what you see is what you get. I hope that I'm congruent, and that how I present in all facets of my life is actually a reflection of who I am. So I think that most people realize that, and I hope they get that I'm a truth teller, and I hope they get that, I'm not comfortable with, it's easy for me to talk about my book. It's much harder for me to talk about me, because I'm not that interesting, but I do have lessons that I can share. So I hope they get to that. I don't do what I do for a spotlight on me. I do it for a number of reasons. One, as a queer woman in business, two, as a fat woman in business, and I want to just say it out loud. Three, as somebody who's, sort of louder and who's different, a big weirdo. I do what I do to represent people that may not see themselves. And I know you can relate to that. And I do it loudly because I must.
Well, a little bit of your response actually is a great segue into this next question, which I'm stealing. I was on a panel and they asked this question to me, and I thought, oh, this is such a good question, I'm going to borrow it. So you're a daughter, a mom, a wife, a badass. How has your intersectional identities impact how you show up?
Yeah,
and you can answer that in a number of ways, but how do you just show up in general? And then how has it played a role in your career?
Well, I think, I often tell people that before there was the phrase code switching, I think that I did a lot to tamp certain aspects of my identity. Some of those, those pieces and parts of me that the world may not have been comfortable with. And I often tell people, I don't think that I realized any kind of success in my life until I stopped working so hard to make everybody comfortable with me. And when I stopped doing that, I found my path. And so for me, that was being in the closet. It was fine. I was a theater major, and I was a theater nerd, and there were lots of gay people there, but you didn't take it outside. It's like the restaurant industry. I also waited tables because that's what you did, right? You worked in theater and you waited tables to make actual money. And that was also sort of an insular, way of being in the world. Like, I remember I had dinner with a friend of mine last year when we had dinners with friends of ours. and her husband, and she had worked at Bryant Lake Bowl, and he didn't. He was in like the securities industry, and he's been in it for a long time. And I said, well, how did you meet? And she said, he was a customer. And I said, well, what made you date him? And he took it very personally. And I don't know that we're over that yet, but what I recognized was he didn't get that when you're in the restaurant industry, that's your whole world, right? And when I was in theater, that was my whole world. And there are tons of intersections in our professional lives, but they often don't include some of those identities that I represent. And so I think for me, I always thought, well, when I started in business, I thought, I can be funny, I can be big or bold or boisterous, maybe, but I can't be gay here, because what if clients say, oh, we're not interested? And, and I also think we have a problem in our country where moral issues and social issues get conflated with political issues. Yes. And we have decided that there are certain political issues we shouldn't be talking about. And I don't agree. And I have to speak my conscience. So, those intersections and how it's impacted my career, how that stuff has impacted my career is sort of a constant thing that I'm recognizing and growing into. And I think when I came out of the closet, my career actually started.
Yeah. Wow. In the book,
and I mean professionally, I have never been in the closet, like entirely in the closet. Let's be clear.
What was the pivotal moment for you to say, I'm done with this. I'm going to come out of the closet for work?
Well, I want to be clear too. There wasn't like this big moment, but when we talk about code switching, I remember early in my career, I avoided pronouns when talking about my partner or my life or people. I just avoided pronouns because I didn't want to call attention to who or what might have been at home, or what my life looked like outside of work. So it wasn't like a big coming out moment. It was just, I stopped being so careful. And I stopped worrying so much about whether or not other people were comfortable with me. That's their stuff. That's their issue. And I started just being exactly who I am. And it turns out, the stuff that makes people more uncomfortable is when I say things that nobody wants to hear. It certainly isn't the fact that I'm gay, because my life is super boring.
I doubt that. Your response reminds me of a conversation I just had recently about, there are, so I belong to this close group of women of color professionals. And we reminisce and we reflect on our experience kind of coming up into the positions that we have now. And for so long, we code switch, to use that word, we code switch, we put on this armor and this way of acting and way of presenting ourselves to be accepted, to be able to just be seen as capable. And now that we're here, and now that we're managing, for some of us, managing young people, emerging leaders who don't have to, or who've not had to, or who choose not to wear that armor, and they challenge us. Mm-hmm. And then I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I'm perpetuating a way of doing business. What is professionalism, right? And that's been on my mind a lot lately as a woman of color managing a team of 12. How can I create an environment for people to show up as their authentic self? Because without having to worry about that, and you mentioned this in the book, about how if people, or maybe it was a Twitter exchange, if people are worried about things, they're not going to show up 100%, right? So how do we create this culture where people can show up, be themselves, while still conducting themselves in a way that we want them to conduct that's congruent with the values of the organization? how do you do that at Clockworks? Because I want you to be able to talk a little bit about Clockworks. What do you do there? What is Clockworks about? And how do you create that environment?
Sure. I love that question. And, it's an always exploring the right answer kind of answer. But I also think we're at this really pivotal point in work and the evolution of work, where right now, because of the disruption caused by the pandemic, I think we have to do a lot of organizational soul searching, or maybe organizational soul building. And we have to recognize that we've been on this path to more autonomy and more co-creation with individuals inside of organizations for a long time. And I think now's the moment where we're being forced to embrace it, or we should be being forced to embrace it. Like the power of the individual and the power of, the teams, the collaborative teams that we work with is enormous. And I think we've worked really hard to maintain these cultures that are sort of ruled by unnecessary hierarchy and bureaucracy. And that's something that I've always struggled with. And I think that, early in my career, we sold a company to a very traditional organization. And mergers and acquisitions are always, painful, right? So I'm not telling anybody who's been through that anything new, but in some instances, the business case is clear, but the culture case is real muddy. And we had one of those. And it was a super traditional organization. It was very hierarchical. It was a lot about kowtowing to leadership. It was a lot about telling them what they wanted to hear, to a point where it was not honest. Like I would sit in a room, and I was the only woman, I was the youngest woman, I was the only person under 40 who was leading a business unit. I was the only woman on the leadership team for a period of time, and there was one other. And I was also the only woman who wore pants
Oh my God.
on the leadership. So I was thrilling them on the regular. But I would sit in the room and watch people lie to we would have these, what they called business unit reviews, where all the leaders of the business units would come together and talk about progress. And they would, instead of telling the truth about things they were struggling with and process through how to address them, they would just tell untruths. And it was so weird to me because I was young, and this was my first real leadership position, and I thought, is this the way the world works?
Yeah.
Where we tell the boss what they want to hear in order to just get through the day. And have I been fooling myself? And I think that was such a learning experience for me. And I saw how the culture wrapped itself around the way things have always been. And all of these people, they didn't trust leadership. Leadership didn't trust them. I watched the leadership of that organization walk around on the floor where people worked at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon in the summer. And that was the level, that was the extent of their engagement. So I learned some really practical, weird lessons early in my leadership career that made me think, wow, first of all, it was all tactical, right? It was like tactical things that we did to keep people in line. There was no real strategy for engaging them and giving them some sense of ownership. And there was no real relationship building.
Yeah.
And there wasn't sort of this, there wasn't a foundation of trust and openness and encouragement and inclusion early. And as a result, there was just constant tension, and those people could have cared less about that company. So that was a big learning experience for me, and it informed, and I haven't even answered your question, but there's not a big answer to it. And I think that's the thing. It doesn't require anything, anything extraordinary. It just requires some humanity and willingness to collaborate and hear ideas from all parts of the organization and encourage people, to show up even if they're scared. and recognize that there's, we work in technology. Clockwork is an experience design and technology consultancy. So we build digital product for companies. That could be applications, that could be, and the way we show up is in a variety of ways. We do change enablement. Sometimes we're working with people and teams and we're building strategies around technology. Sometimes we're building the technology itself. And technology has changed us enormously.
Absolutely.
So the people piece became a necessity because we were building things that changed the way organizations worked and behaved and the people behaved. And we had to sort of embrace the idea that we had to help and coach and provide thinking and leadership and governance and, motivation for those people too. And so I think, first of all, I wanted to work someplace that valued humans.
Yeah.
So I had to build it. And then I wanted the world to know that, we can co-create our workplaces with our colleagues. We don't have to decide and then hope that they show up and care.
And I think that in a similar vein, you remember all those places where you worked where you didn't feel valued, right? Like I remember those more. And those were, to me, like for you, the big lessons of, if I ever get to a place, I'm going to change that, right? I want people to feel a sense of ownership. I want people to feel like they belong here. And so let's get to that humanity part and let's get to the book.
Okay.
So for those of you who are tuning in, the book is available on Amazon. You can also go to worklikeaboss.com. Is it, Nancy?
Mm-hmm.
And there you will find links to some independent booksellers where you can buy the book. But I want everybody to know that it's really important for Nancy and for all authors if you write a review on Amazon. So it's a love-hate relationship with Amazon, I know. But if you can, if you do have the book or are about to buy the book, certainly you can number of places, but please still think about putting an Amazon review up there for Nancy. Also, if you are the type of person who likes to listen to audibles, an audiobook, Nancy actually reads this book. So it's her voice reading the book. So if you really want like a verbal kick in the pants and you get the audiobook, she's the one reading it. So I'm going to open up the conversation about the book in this way. So you open the book by talking about a very vulnerable scenario. You're about to get on stage. Maybe you're already on stage and you're sweating and you're getting really hot because you actually are having a hot flash. And you could tell that people in the audience are seeing you sweat. And instead of pretending this isn't happening, you actually talk about it. And you lean into, being vulnerable. And now we can Brene Brown this all day long, but the words empathy, humanity, vulnerability come up a lot in the book. Why are those things so important? And I'm sure it gets back to the things you talked about and the environments that you've seen that you want to be better for everybody. But why those themes for you?
Yeah, I love that Brene Brown this. And she really did, illuminate the concept and the importance of vulnerability. I think for me, one of the things I recognized and needed to sort of acknowledge in writing the book is that we look to organizations to tell us how to behave. So, we want them to decide what the culture is like, and we want them to decide what our values are. And we can subscribe to those, reflect those, or reject them, and they never have to be the wiser. This is just a job. What do I care? Or they don't get me, or they're idiots, because one of the things that I recognize even at Clockwork, and I was saying this to somebody the other day, I got a DM on Twitter from someone the other day saying, when will I ever do something that will qualify me to work for you? And I said, listen, take some, if it's any consolation, even clock workers hate their job, it doesn't matter the degree of care or empathy or humanity, work, people struggle with work in any environment. So there is no perfect job. And the way we talk about work also is misleading, right? Like if I do something I love, I'll never work a day in my life. That is such garbage. You will work every day of your life until you're not working anymore. it doesn't matter how much you love your job. I love my job most days. Some days I absolutely don't. And the reason for that is the people.
Yeah.
I mean, as great as they are, as much as I love them, some days they're difficult, whether it's the clients, whether it's my colleagues, my cohorts, the people I meet in the street, you know, whatever. People are both beautiful and horrible, and we are them. And
Yep.
so I think that, you know, one of the things I discovered a long time ago is that instead of taking any accountability for how a culture feels, or, you know, how healthy a department or a team is, we all sort of, and instead of taking any responsibility or, you know, exhibiting any desire to want to be part of the change, we say, well, you know, what could I possibly do? I'm just one person. It's a very big company.
Right.
And, you know, the other day I was doing a talk and I said, you know, I don't work for a big company, but I work with them. And, you know, I sit on boards for some large organizations. I have worked my entire career stepping in and out of large organizations and doing problem solving for them. And what I will say is, I honest to God don't know how we get anything done. I have no idea. Big companies, you know, the enterprise is really just code for a clown car. You know, it doesn't matter how successful or, you know, progressive or technologically advanced or evolved an organization is, how most companies get anything done is a mystery. And the reason for that is people. And it's people who either say, I can't make any change, what could I possibly do? Or it's people who think, well, this place sucks, I'm just going to come in and do my job. Or the leadership's there, you know, the CEO is a moron. He's the problem. And nobody, you know, people very rarely go, actually, what am I doing?
Right.
What sort of micro activities or, you know, big, you know, what sort of energy am I bringing? What kind of behavior am I demonstrating? How am I showing up? And I think that's really critical, because the thing that makes work suck is not the CEO most of the time.
Yeah.
It's the people you spend all of your days with, and you're that to them. So if work is unpleasant, what can I do to change that? How can my dog is growling. I have no idea why. Now it's happening. This is better than when my son walked in shirtless during a talk and asked me if I wanted the other half of the sandwich. So at least this is just the dog barking. I think that people don't recognize their own power and responsibility. And that's where we fail each other. And work and people are judgy.
Yeah.
Judge one another. You're making me uncomfortable. I want you to show up in a way that I can be comfortable with.
It's so much easier to complain though.
Right?
Isn't
Right?
it?
And I talk about that, as you know. You know, negativity bias is a thing. I experience this a lot. When people ask me, how are you? If I say, I'm fantastic, they look at me like, what the hell is the matter with you? But if I were to say, you know, I'm okay, I'm really sick of COVID, who isn't? You know, or my dog barked during a talk, or my hip hurts, or my husband's a jerk, or we like that stuff. Oh, I know it. My kids too. I can't even, you know, those are the things that trigger the bigger exchanges, but it's not productive. And it's not.
How do we get out from that? Because that's hard. It can be hard, and especially harder right now during a pandemic, right? So harder as we're working remotely. How do we get ourselves out of that? How do we model that behavior that we want others to have? How do you do it?
I think it's intentional. I think it's intentionality. I think you have to want to do it. And you have to recognize where you're falling short, where, you know, your tendency to complain is actually, you know, a bigger issue for you, or a bigger characteristic than your desire or your willingness to show up and be solution focused. You know, I mean, you know, as a leader, the thing that I marvel at is how easy it is for people to point to what's broken. It is very, very rare for people to point to what's broken and say, and I have a solution, or I'd like to try something, or maybe if we tried X. And that's something that I wanted to like put on paper and call out. You know, we all have power to change, even if it's micro changes, even if it's, people say it was such a big company. Yes, but there are micro cultures inside of that organization.
Absolutely. So on page 128, so I'm going to be
Okay.
weird about it.
I haven't got it memorized, so.
So on page 28, one of the takeaways of this chapter, and this chapter is called, this is Kick Your Fear in the Face chapter.
Yes.
So one of the things, if you haven't read the book, Nancy at the beginning tells us, she instructs us, and I'm following the rules. She instructs us that this isn't a book that is meant to be read linear, so you don't have to read it from beginning to end. In fact, it's been great fun for me, Nancy, to just have this book on my table and then just open it, see where it goes. And every page that I turn to is relevant. And so the page I'm turning to right now is page 128. It's in the Kick Your Fear in the Face. And one of the takeaways from this chapter is bosses aren't fearless, but they fear less. I need you to help me fear less. I started a job 8 months ago. I'm managing a team of 12, all remotely, never met them. I'm in constant fear all the time because I just don't know them. And so I'm getting a sense of the culture. I'm trying to create my own culture, or the culture for our department. But I'm in constant fear about getting things wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what you said there, you used a word that I think is really important, and that is trying. And that's what makes you a boss. You don't necessarily know exactly what you're doing, but you're trying things, you're trying to make connections, and you're trying to foster a culture, even though we're in this whole new world. And I imagine you're trying to be inclusive of them in the process of forging that culture. And maybe even you've been a little vulnerable about this position that you're in. And maybe you've asked for what you need, which I think is essential in leadership. We can't expect that people know how to show up or what is, most important to us. We have to ask for things. So I think it's not leaning in too hard to hierarchy, but leaning in a little harder to humanity and showing up in the way that they need you to, which is aware of this unique, situation that we are all in, and open to the ideas that they might bring to work with it.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes someone's just got to give permission for others to try, right? And I think for a long time, and I know I've been a part of this, is the fixation on perfect prevents so many things from happening, right? And I've gotten more comfortable to being okay with trying and knowing that we're going to fail sometimes and we're going to make mistakes. And this is the one thing I love about the foundation is the words mistake and failure are in our strategic plan. And that tells me, okay, this is really an organization that's built around a learning, right? We're constant learners. And having that, even though I'm new, having that as something to point to say, here's why we're doing this. You guys might all hate me while we're trying, but here's why we're going to do things a different way, because either the pandemic is forcing us to, or we just got to try, right? So it's failure and being okay with that. But it's harder, I feel like, when people are looking to you to have the answer when you're the boss. And that's where the fear comes in. The fear isn't, for me, the trying. It's the potentially letting people down.
Sure, I get that. I think people look to you to have all the answers because that's what we've been trained to do. That's my boss. So so I think when you open things up to more, processing and experimenting, and when you make space for failure as a reflection of what the organization is committed to, you're actually creating a safer space for the team. If you have all the answers, then what's their point?
Right.
So to me, and you know as well as I do, the thing that makes me a great leader is not having, and I'm not saying I'm a great leader, but the thing that would make me a great leader is not having all the answers. It's hiring people that might find them or better. I'm thrilled with the people that I work with. My leadership team is so much better than me, so much better than me. And over time, that's been one of my greatest joys and probably, accomplishments, is just being able to attract talent that is so far beyond any place I've ever been.
Yeah.
And I learn from them every day.
Yeah. I love that. In the chapter, Talk Like a Human, you present this challenge of sometimes it's really hard for us to receive things we don't want to hear. Like how do we take in that information? How do we process it? And it's stuff like, oh, your budget's going to be cut in half. Like how do we receive that? How do we process it? And what was really interesting to me was, instead of help formulating responses, you actually, your solution is, we've just got to be better listeners. Talk more about that.
Yeah, well, I one of the books I recommend in the book is the Four Agreements. And the reason I feel really strongly about that book is because it changed, my life. And the biggest agreement in that book, the most important one from where I sit, is don't take anything personally. And I think even if you are a hardcore business person, when you hear things that impact your ability to do the job the way you envisioned it, like we're cutting your budget in half, it is so hard not to take that stuff personally. And so I think, really just being able to sit with things, hear them, understand that, what we're talking about is organizational and the solution is organizational too. It's not you, because our immediate response is, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Well, that you don't value me, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, the opportunity in just sort of sitting with it and listening better and receiving the information, the opportunity we give ourselves to process often gives us the space to include other people. And I think that's important. The other thing that I think, in terms of that particular point, is we often, Brene Brown did monetize vulnerability, but only in, and this is not a criticism, it's just something that I've noticed. Brene gave us all permission to be vulnerable,
right?
But she doesn't talk much about receiving another person's vulnerability, which I think is equally as important, and it's something we are lousy at. So it's never easy for any leader in an organization to tell you, I'm cutting your budget in half. And this is a shared issue, a shared responsibility. So I also think having empathy for the person delivering the message and having openness and making space for a collaborative solution versus taking it personally and rejecting and then feeling sabotaged, which is how we react when we are at our simplest selves. When we are our base selves, our reactions are not reactions to be proud of. And I think, receiving other people's vulnerability looks like a lot of things. When I did a panel a few years ago, I produced one, and it was of people transitioning in the workplace. And it was mostly male to female trans women. And they represented their experiences transitioning in some of the largest companies in this market. So there was somebody from Medtronic, there was another engineer from 3M, and some of them were literally rocket scientists. And there were a couple of older folks, engineers, who had sort of paved this way a long time ago, and the newer folks who were newer to their, sort of journeys, and they talked about what they had gotten from these other people, these other women who had already done the work in their organization. And the thing that I found fascinating across the board is how the organizations initially responded to people who were coming to them with, it was this deeply vulnerable request, which is support me in my work as I find my better, truer self. And the organizations rejected them wholly. That, and frankly, I feel that way about our culture. It's like, you may not understand why someone needs to transition because that is not your life experience.
Right.
That is on you, not them. It is not their job to be vulnerable with you and then do the work for you. I think that's true of people of color, right? Like, we are having so many conversations there in at that sort of point where the work is ours individually to do, because the vulnerability that we are witnessing in our workplaces, in our communities, where people are saying, we need help. We need allies. We need support. We can't do this alone. And the problem is real. It's happening in so many places and we're saying, no, it's not. It's not real, or that's your problem to deal with. It's not my problem.
Right. Just work hard.
Yeah,
right?
Just work harder. Exactly.
Or let's not talk about it. That's even worse.
Oh God. It's like and the thing that I often tell people is, I realized this a long time ago. You may not like the fact that I'm gay, but I'm not going anywhere. Trans people aren't going anywhere. People of color aren't going. This is the world you live in. So do the work.
Right. This is where our fates are connected, right? Whether we want to believe that or not, our fates are tied.
I love that. And work is a reflection of life. It's not like another place where we can handle things differently. I was talking to somebody today and we were having this conversation about wanting to add a person of color to a leadership team and being intentional about it, looking for the right candidate, but that perspective. And the conversation then went to, well, what will HR say if we're that deliberate? And I said, and this is where the world is broken. This is that point where we are just so broken that we can't just say that this perspective is important in this place. So important that we're going to focus on finding that person, and not to tokenize, but to value that perspective and ensure that it's included. And it went immediately to, who will sue us?
Wow.
Right? The world is we're broken, but we do it to each other. And I do a lot of HR conferences and HR hates me. They hate me.
Well, there's some questions in the Q&A, but before we go over there, I have been following with great interest your Twitter activity in the last several days around this new environment that we're working in virtually amidst COVID. And the thought of what we might do once everyone gets their vaccination, goes back to normal. And there's just a flurry of activities on Twitter, and I'm sure elsewhere in person too, just that fear of, are we going to lose out? Like, what are we not learning from this moment to do work differently? Mm-hmm. How do we create a new culture given what we know and given what we can do, knowing that we don't have it perfect? But tell me why you were spending time here unpacking that with so many people on Twitter. And if you want, as a kind of jumping off point, like I captured a couple of the Twitter responses, and one of them is trust. Because I think that for a long time, we didn't allow for people to work remotely because we kind of want the butts in the seats and we want to see that you're here doing work, right? And someone chimed in about how there might be differences generationally. And I know that you chimed in there, but talk about that thread of how work can or should be different post-COVID.
Well, I hear, now that the vaccine is in sight, I hear a lot of people talking about going back.
Yeah.
And I believe they believe there is a back to go to. And I think that that kind of thinking is wrong-sided. I think we should never go back. And in fact, when we talk about issues of trust, it's not a generational thing. I mean, I think we want to make it a generational thing, but I don't necessarily think it is. I think that it's an issue relative to hiring strategy. Don't hire people you don't trust, and don't consider yourself a leader if trust is a thing that somebody, that you're not willing to offer first, that you're not willing to invest in those people first.
Right.
I think that the idea that people are guilty until proven innocent in the workplace is counterproductive. It doesn't work for anybody. You want to hire qualified.
Right. Think about all that time we spend making sure.
Oh yeah. And I just think there's so much, like, we have been given this moment of disruption for a reason. And it's, I don't want to get into all the tragic, unfortunate, ways that it's been handled, and the loss of life and all of that. It's a horrible tragedy. It's a horrible moment in history. That being said, this is what we've been talking about for ages. We've been talking about disruption. This is it. And I think in going back, there's all sorts of things to consider. One is the autonomy we need to extend to the people that work and serve organizations. Quite frankly, the reason it came up for me initially was I'm so much more engaged in board meetings, in, just any meeting, being able to do it on Zoom. Part of the reason for that is, I'm a woman who has a real low bar in terms of what I have to do to be ready for anything. Like, I take a shower, I dry my hair, I walk out the door, and I think, did I wear that to that last board meeting? That's all I do. Was that the shirt I wore last time with buttons? I should probably, I sometimes feel for what women have to go through. I just said this, I'm writing an op-ed about that Twitter thread. And in the op-ed, I said, a man can wear the same suit for 14 days straight, and either nobody notices or they don't question it. But a woman has to think every single day about how she appears, which is wasted energy.
Yes.
And what are we doing it for? And we hold each other to those standards. It's not even men we're trying to be pretty for. I personally don't care, and don't care about, other women and what they think about my shirt with buttons. You're lucky I'm wearing buttons. But even we were in was it a committee meeting last week for your foundation, and they talked about when we come back together, and it's like, okay, sure, but I'm wearing a t-shirt right now and I am fully engaged. Nobody cares. And I didn't have to figure out how I was going to get across town, when my meetings are back to back, to be there and not be late and park my car and not know where I'm going. And I started to think about that. And beyond that, I started to think about accessibility, period. How many jobs and opportunities are being withheld from qualified individuals because of that stuff that I just talked about, and access, and absolute access? I think accessibility is something we've talked a really good game about, just like distributed teams and remote working and flexible stuff. But people have made it really hard on each other for there to be actual true access to opportunity. And so I just think, like, if I struggle with putting on a shirt, there are more qualified people than me out there struggling with the fact that they don't have access to jobs because of garbage that stands between them and opportunity. Oh, can you see? That's like and
stand up. Well, I can't wait for that op-ed. When is it going to run? Hopefully.
I don't know. I'm wrapping it up today, and I'm going to see who wants it. Maybe nobody will.
I doubt that. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to get to the Q&A, Nancy. Okay, here's one. How do you balance between being bold and a strong communicator with people reading that as unapproachable? And she's being nice here with her choice of words. So how do you balance between being a bold and strong communicator with people reading that as potentially unapproachable? Because when a man is serious and confident, he's an alpha male, but women are viewed differently.
Yeah, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
It isn't. I mean, that is, I owe it to every interaction I have and every engagement or every opportunity to be competent, right? To show up and bring some amount of content or substance that is, that matters, that's impactful. I can't worry anymore about whether or not I'm going to scare somebody, some guy, or whether or not I'm not, I need to be good at what I do. I don't have to make you comfortable in how I do it. And that's just old. It's just old, and it's not useful.
So our advice to her is you do her.
Do you. Yeah. And don't worry about it. Now, that being said, I certainly have, like, you saw me just get hot about something, right? Yeah. And I know when I get heated about something, I'm like big as a house. And I have had, when I was growing up, my mother's a physician and she went to medical school in 1957. And she was, the only woman doctor in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan when she moved up there. And she was unusual in her field. And she used to tell me how to talk to men. So this is a woman's event, so I can say this. She used to say, and she was the first woman president of the medical center in the community we lived in, and she was the first woman president of the medical director of the VA. And so she had a history in a career where men weren't. Where women weren't. And she would say, when you want to talk to a man, don't raise your voice. Don't get shrieky. She would say, center yourself, make sure your feet are apart, speak in low tones, lean into him. And she talked to me about ways that you could make the hair on the back of a guy's neck stand on end by talking to him. So I recognize that sometimes men are like, holy ma, what are you doing? And I have, male business partners, and I have said to them before, do not focus on how I'm delivering this message. Listen to what I'm saying. So I have provided a little wrapper to make them more comfortable, but their comfort isn't my job.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, we've got, let me see if we have another question here. Here's a question. What does this let us, okay, so I think what she's referring to is COVID. What does this let us learn about building community and collaboration? They miss their colleagues in real life, but also about hiring the right person, regardless of geography or accessibility or physical ability.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that we are understanding the possibility that fully distributed teams allow, and we're going to stumble in how we add to our teams and how we determine a person's contribution to a culture and to an organization. We have to figure that out. And I think now's the time to do it. And it's also the time to sort of abandon all those old judgments, that we put on people, and stop projecting our own stuff onto other people, and just make space for them to show up the way they would, because the way they would might challenge us in all the best ways to be better. And so I think that's the opportunity we have right now. So I don't know that there are any answers, but everything that we used to do makes sense because it's in the past. Yeah. What we have to do is a mystery because it's in the future, and we don't necessarily get the future because we're creating it as we go. So we have to give ourselves room for trial and error and experimentation, and giving people a chance versus expecting them to hit the ground running, and inviting them to experiment with us. And we're hiring a variety of leadership positions at Clockwork right now. Some are new positions, and one of the things that I'm asking everybody is, how comfortable are you with ambiguity?
Yes,
because we're doing this together.
This is like my other favorite topic, because it's the, how do you operate with the unknown, knowing that you've got just half of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because much of the work that I think you do and I do, and I'm sure most of us do in our work, if we think about it, is working with a lot of unknowns, and work is going to get more unpredictable, right?
Oh yeah. And people want
That's a great question.
predictability. What's my job? What's my job description? Oh yeah, I can do those things. That's it. And I think, oh, that's safe, but it's not necessarily true.
Because I think in this virtual world, and I know we're almost running up against time, I actually find that, and people have told this to me, they are working harder now.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because they don't have to worry about button-up shirt or stressing about where's that closest parking ramp to this meeting, but all of that time is spent in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we're all on Zoom for hours on end, and I know I feel the weight of the work more now because it is so hyper focused on it rather than all the other stuff. And so in some ways I need a little bit of a break. Like I've got to be able to give myself some breaks in the day, but I think people are showing up more fully. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to, for those who want to go back to the office, but I myself am going to tell my team, and there's an openness at the foundation of do what works for you, right?
And then we have to mean it.
We have to mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And not penalize people for doing work that is maybe different than their colleagues, right? That's that work environment, it could look different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nancy, I'm going to make sure that you, before we throw it back to Anna, any last words for you, from you to our audience about the book or anything we discussed today, and then we'll pass it back to Anna. But this was great fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I appreciate you so much, Pahua, in the world, and just this opportunity to talk to you. And I am a huge fangirl of yours too. So thank you. And thanks again to the Chamber, and thanks to the folks who came today. I another Zoom thing is nothing that anybody ever wants, but I sure appreciate the opportunity to have one with y'all.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Well, back to you, Anna.
Thank you. This was amazing, and I want to keep going for another couple of hours and then go have dinner and cocktails, and let's just keep it going. I think you've got a line of people who are going to budge in on your trip to Mexico, so just be prepared for that.
Yeah.
Couple things to close out. I will, like I said, I will send you links for Nancy's book, for ordering it locally, for ordering it on Kindle, for ordering Audible, all the things. She's also got a newsletter that is highly recommended, so I'll links for signing that up as well. One quick note from a chamber perspective, our annual meeting is tomorrow afternoon. It is live virtually at First Avenue. So tomorrow afternoon at 3:30. I will have a registration link in the post-event email for that as well. Thank you to all of our sponsors again. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to our speakers for your time and your input. This was amazing. I'd love to do it again someday. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.